Hi everyone, welcome back to the highly intermittent as yet unnamed Curtis Holt podcast. It's not really a podcast, but it kind of is, but whatever. Hi, I hope you're doing well. Today we're going to have a little talk about some projects that I have in mind, like general project ideas that I haven't really fleshed out, but it might be interesting getting some feedback for them, while also generally updating you on some things that I've been working on. And we'll also talk about, some recent popular subjects like AI artwork, maybe. We'll see. So yeah, sit down, grab a drink, maybe put me on the side while you're working, and let's have a little chat. So for the first thing on the agenda, I want to talk about an idea I've had, which I'm kind of codenaming Blender Cinema. If you've been listening to some of my ramblings recently, you might know that on my main YouTube channel, I've been kind of changing how I think about the content I put out. And instead of thinking about it in more kind of selfish ways of how can I talk about everything that I'm doing, I'm trying to think about it more in terms of how can we produce content that helps people or provides a service to people, or something predictable, something they can kind of incorporate in their lifestyle in some way. So I tend to ask myself questions like, okay, well, are there any problems we can identify? One of them that I'm interested in at the moment is people that want to make short films. There's no obvious benefit to doing that. Like from a time investment standpoint, it's a pretty bad idea generally, especially if you don't have a pre-existing audience. You could spend months and months or maybe like a year or a few years working on a short film project and then put it out and it'll get a few hundred views, maybe a few thousand views, depending on how good you are at, putting it out there or how lucky you get with the algorithm. Generally making short films or short animated content without that luck element or anything else to prop it up is generally a really bad idea from a time investment standpoint. Not such a bad idea from a learning standpoint. They're really good ways to kind of develop your skills. And if you're smart about it, you'll also be developing portfolio pieces as you're doing that. But simply for the sake of putting it out there for it to blow up or for it to generate an audience, it's not really a good idea doing that from scratch without having a realistic plan to market it. So I sit here and think, all right, little Blender entrepreneur, is there anything we can do to maybe help people that want to make short films? And I sit and think, okay, well, maybe connecting them with resources or connecting them with other short filmmakers, but that doesn't really solve any problems. Again, that's focusing more on the learning side of things. So I thought, okay, what if we short films maybe with Blender are usually these one-shot things where you hear about them in the community, you watch them, you go, hey, that's kind of cool. I'm maybe a bit inspired by that. And then you don't really watch it again. And it just feels like it's never really taken seriously as content. Even the actual Blender open movies, we watch them because we want to see what can be done with Blender. They're kind of like proof of concepts, but we don't actually watch them as stories that we obsess over, if that makes sense. Not in the same way that you would watch something on Netflix or Disney Plus and get really involved and build a community around it. And largely that is to do with the content, maybe even the length of the content. But I just feel like there's a presentation or a context issue with that. So I was thinking, taking some lessons from popular culture streaming services and stuff, could we make a website that functionally acts like Netflix, Disney Plus, Paramount Plus, BBC iPlayer, all that kind of thing, but is more focused for Blender shorts? Something kind of curated. So it's a website which looks like a streaming service that puts the highest quality Blender short content we can find first and foremost. A place where people can sit down when they're eating their dinner or, chilling with friends, Netflix and chill, and use it just like a streaming service. However, it just streams the content from YouTube, from different Blender creators. So not only having the Blender open movies, but also content from Blender creators you're not that aware of, experimental content. With the idea being that we have a location where we can congregate all these things in a format that's understandable to the popular culture, like a streaming service, but acts as a place where people come specifically to watch and to enjoy the content for what it is, rather than just seeing it as a tech demo. Okay, post edit in before someone comments, oh my god, why would you make people pay to watch some free Blender content? No. You've misunderstood. I'm talking about a completely free website that allows you just to watch the YouTube short content in a more regular streaming service interface, helping people to discover the content in a more enjoyable way. And I figure if we had a website like this, with this streaming service kind of branding, we could, technically brand each of the shorts in collaboration with the creators, having a dedicated page for the shorts, maybe a section where you can see if it's part of a series or not, descriptions of it, maybe some behind the scenes posts as well, possibly linking to some behind the scenes content that we would do in collaboration with the creators. But also none of this requires any particular expenses, because we can just stream directly from YouTube or just have a large YouTube embed. And the thing is, this would also help people to find the creators making short content and raise money for the creators making the short content as well. Because if we're just embedding YouTube, when the person actually goes to click and watch it, then it will have the YouTube ads on it. So if the creators monetize, the money goes straight to them. So we don't need to worry about revenue splits. service or anyone paying for a service and then splitting that with the creator. No, it's just done automatically because we're just creating a wrapper, if you like, a nice community streaming service watch-centered wrapper around the YouTube content. So the only real costs involved would be just setting up the website and hosting it. It'd be very difficult to get people to actually kind of go to a website like that routinely, not unless there was like some good benefit to it. I think the main benefits would be discovering new content to enjoy, but it kind of requires there already being some substantial content in the first place. The aim for a project like that would be to give people that want to make shorts a platform to have them seen. So imagining that enough people would treat the website like any other streaming service, which would be a tall order, but in a hypothetical future where that would be possible, being an independent creator who doesn't have an audience and actually having a place to put the content where it can be watched and enjoyed by people, you know, eating, working, chilling, whatever, would be great. And also having that feedback into views for their own YouTube channels, for example, would be great as well, because like the viewers could click through and then take a look at the profiles and leave comments and whatever. So I just thought it would be an interesting idea having a site like that brings it all together, a place that's just about the content, like the output, the watchable stuff where people can binge all different kinds of like Blender centric shorts. And it wouldn't, you know, I guess it wouldn't just be exclusively Blender, it would be Blender focused. It's like a celebration of what can be done. But, you know, Blender isn't the be all and end all for short creation, especially not for like, you know, compositing, texturing, whatever, you know, just something that significantly makes use of Blender could be shown on this website. I think it'll be a nice way to bring audience members to new creators, have a way for them to make more money because of that fact, and cultivate a community spirit around short content. I'm sure there are probably other places where people have tried to do similar things before, but you know, I think having something like a streaming service interface provides an inherently different vibe to like a forum thread interface. So this Blender Cinema or Blender Netflix project is just something I've kind of just been brainstorming independently. So we'll see if I go anywhere with it. Another idea I was thinking of is that there are so many like cool channels on YouTube which started off as like publications, you know, like GQ, Lad Bible, whatever, that get usually celebrities on and just doing fun little videos and interviews and stuff like that. And I was thinking, well, wouldn't it be fun to do a channel again for like Blender creators where we can kind of connect people with their personalities more? Because another thing about Blender creators putting YouTube content out is, again, there's this kind of discrepancy in the perception where in that case it's largely about the content and not about the creator, which is fine, but it'd be nice to highlight creators more in a dedicated channel, in the same way that with the Blender Cinema project it'd be about highlighting the content more than like the tech demo aspect. With this channel it would be more about highlighting the creator personality rather than the creator content. So some kind of channel where we would do like funny interviews or little challenges and stuff just to kind of highlight them and, you know, give them a funny moment to shine. So I wrote a couple of notes: channels specifically for highlighting members of the community, getting them to answer short interviews and talk about what they're doing, consistent high quality production format, keep people inspired and bring a community to people that wouldn't otherwise have one. So it'd be a way to kind of highlight what people are doing. I like the idea of doing something that's both serious and comedic at the same time. So serious in the way that we can have people sharing how they're using Blender for important things, and then for other content on the same channel we would do something a bit more comedic, like getting some of the Blender creators to take part in little challenges, like not competitions per se, but I don't know, like, you know how they do these lie detector tests for celebrities? It's not really something you can do digitally, but the same kind of vibe where you're putting someone's personality in focus for a kind of light-hearted test to kind of reveal who they are a bit more, if that makes sense. So yeah, those are a couple of ideas so far I've been playing with. The Blender Cinema one, and a personality-focused community channel to teach people about creators, not even just like influencer type creators, but people using Blender around the world in different industries for interesting reasons. We do already have the Blender Nest channel for like general community creator discussions, which we haven't really done too much with recently, but it's not really got the same vibe which I'm visualizing in my head. I'm thinking about stuff that's like very clean, prepared, and high production quality content. So a third idea I've been thinking of is an auction project. So this one has been inspired by me taking part in like auctions recently. One thing I've noticed is that they become like community events, and also people buy things which they wouldn't usually buy, and prices can end up going way above estimates. But the interesting thing is that for pieces sold at auctions, the auction becomes like a significant part of the story. We see this for things like charity auctions when YouTubers do things to raise money for charities. But I was thinking, well, there's a weird attitude with like digital artists selling artwork online. They can make prints available, but no one goes out of their way to buy something unless they really want it, right? People that would buy something aren't going to go out their way to do so, if that makes sense. And it was interesting because like at the Blender conference, they had all of this Blender merchandise on sale. And some of us were saying, well, maybe I won't buy it now, but I'll buy it when I get home. And I think Martin Kleckner said to me, you won't though. Like, we say we'll buy something, but we never will. Like, we'll never go out of our way to actually do it when we're living our day-to-day routines. I was thinking, well, that's a problem with like trying to sell digital artwork and art prints. I feel like it's something NFTs were kind of trying to solve on the side as well, by trying to give authenticity to things with a digital token. And putting all of these problems together, I was thinking, what if 3 or 4 times a year we do like some kind of community auction thing where artists have made prints of some of their digital art pieces and they've signed them, probably just like one actual authentic copy of a physical version of the digital artwork, signed and sent to whoever's managing the auction. And then 4 times a year, the community congregates and we have these big auction sellouts where we can take a look at all of these authentic signed one-off pieces by the most popular artists in the community to raise money for them, or charity auctions if wanted, but probably for them, because you know how difficult it is for artists to make money nowadays anyway, where there is a dedicated community event where we all come together for a fun time and run an auction. And I think that'll be exciting for people because it adds a competitive aspect that I think, if you've ever taken part in an auction, like actually taken part in the bidding process, you'll know how suddenly exciting it becomes. But I also think it will give like digital artists an opportunity to test real scarcity, not fake digital scarcity, but something that they've actually made. They've printed out like a single copy of their piece, or maybe whoever's managing the auction manages the prints and then just sends it to them to sign and brings it back, like all this managing behind the scenes, where they have physically authenticated with a signature, and it's an actual piece of merchandise that people can get, just a one-off that can be bid for. I think it'd also be an interesting way to, first of all, bring other auction houses on board, because one of the things about like NFTs is that it's not compatible with the global auction system per se. People say that it kind of is, but it's not. You see, for traditional art collectors, there are these terms called red chip and blue chip artworks. Blue chip artwork is what you would think of as like the classic, really, really high-priced, high-value, and impossible to get artworks. Collectors tend to hold on to them and keep them inside of like very secure locations or vaults, or maybe they don't even have like physical ownership over them, but they have the rights of ownership over them. It is also a way for people to store money. That's like a controversial thing because it's very difficult to tax physical property. But there's this whole interesting thing that happened in the pandemic where apparently traditional art collectors were holding all their pieces, and it created a bit of a void for art collection and purchasing, where collectors started turning to what you would call red chip artists, which are modern, more social media focused artists. These largely grew out of like Instagram and places like that. But the thing is, first of all, this is something that digital artists don't really know too much about. And secondly, it's been very difficult trying to merge the spaces, the digital art space where prints are available on demand, and the traditional auction houses where traditional artwork gets its sense of value, which can be extortionate amounts of money. So I thought it would be interesting having like some kind of community auction event, like a structured auction place, where we can try and bridge those spaces, where digital artists participate in real physical scarcity. We make it a community thing where people tend to throw in more money than the art print is actually worth, because that is inevitable. That will happen as soon as there's any aspect of competition. People want to show off with their money. And then it also allows the actual physical product to move out of the community, if there are any other like collectors interested in taking part in this, and then move into traditional auction houses and auction spaces. So yeah, just thought it was an interesting idea to kind of bridge that problem. So that's the third problem my amateur entrepreneurial mind has been kind of brainstorming and thinking about. So far we talked about encouraging more short production and rewarding creators for that. Secondly, trying to bring more of a highlight to Blender creator personalities around the world in different industries on a kind of more central community hub reminiscent of different publications making popular YouTube content. And then thirdly, we've talked about community auction events to kind of bridge the gap between digital and physical auction spaces. These are all ideas I'm interested in experimenting with, but I haven't figured everything out yet. There's still just like brainstorming phases. The fourth idea I want to talk about is an add-on idea. So I've had an idea for an add-on that gives tutorial recommendations as you're using Blender. For example, say you're confused, you want to like UV map an object or something, so you're in the UV editor, but you don't know how it works, and it's very confusing. Maybe you would like open up the side panel, and then there'd be a section in this add-on which gives you recommendations, possibly even based on what tools you have active. Maybe the first version won't go that far, but it'll just say, hey, we see you're in the UV editor space. These are really good tutorials for understanding how to use this. So right inside of Blender, there'll be recommendations for people. I think that'll be a very useful add-on. It really goes hand in hand with the kind of content I make on the main channel with like, the Blender recommendation series. So I really feel like that'll be something interesting for me to do in the future, but it'll be nice to get some feedback on that. As for a problem that's trying to solve, I'd say that's trying to bridge the gap between people that are having trouble with Blender and trying to find educational content with the actual educational content space. Because, the things with like my compilation videos the Blender projects ones, talking about different things happening in the community, is they're quite scatterbrained, which is great for like a, surprise, curiosity aspect, almost like a loot box aspect where people click on my videos not knowing exactly what they're going to get. But for the people that actually are actively in the moment struggling with something, how can we connect them with good recommendations? That's where this add-on would come in. The thing is, it'd be nice to have a way to update those recommendations without having to have the person reinstall the add-on. That would require some kind of network connectivity, which I don't think is frowned upon, but it adds an extra layer of complexity and also security vulnerability. So maybe we won't be able to do that part, but yeah, it's an interesting project to think about. The next idea number 5, I think, is a Blender advent calendar, because maybe someone's done this already, I don't know. They probably have. But I know it's a thing where a lot of companies have done stuff running up to Christmas where like every day a user can get some kind of benefit or reward, and I just think it'd be fun to do like a community focused thing where we could contact different creators and then like every day in December leading up to Christmas, or we don't even have to call it Christmas, for different cultural, religious reasons, whatever. But I think it'd be nice where every day someone can have like a little gift given by different community creators for people that participate in the Blender advent calendar. That's not really solving a problem, it's just fun. Alright, so I think that'll do for the section of business ideas, which have been floating around in my head. Ideas are not something I'm sure in. I have that traditional thing of wanting to start everything, so many things, wanting to learn everything, and having trouble actually sticking with projects I've already created, which is actually another subject we can talk about, because I wanted to talk about how I've had like a strong bout of self-sabotage in the second half of this year. And maybe, a lot of it's my fault psychologically, but not entirely. So a little while back I did a video asking people to contribute if they wanted and give me help with some of the development projects like Biogen, Community Material Pack, Easy BPY, the community roundup videos, all that kind of stuff. And at the point of making that, I was very determined on working on the projects. The problem is, like being a creator, you're responding to signals you get from the community. And there's always this measure of how ambitious and how motivated are you to work on the projects you want to work on, and how much feedback do you take from those signals you're getting. Signals can be anything in the form of like comments, just general reactions to ideas you have by members in your community or even your friends, just getting like a general noise, a consensus, if you like, of whether something you're going to do is going to be a good idea or a bad idea, whether there's interest, whether people are excited, whether people are just more likely completely indifferent to an idea. The thing is, releasing that video asking for help came at a bit of a weird time where the channel was on this bit of like a downward incline. It was actually followed by a good community roundup video, but then the 3 videos after that performed like extremely poorly. And if you watch my previous podcast video, I've talked about how the channel was about to reach this critical point where it was about to start hemorrhaging subscribers rather than gaining them. This kind of came around the Blender conference time as well. So there was just a lot happening all at once where actually stopping and making or working on development projects might not have been the best focus for my time. Rather, saving the channel would have been the better idea. And that's what I did in the end. But also, like, just in between all of that, there were times where I really wanted to sit down and work on some projects, like especially Biogen, and I just couldn't find the motivation to do it, or there were just all these other technical things. There would always be something else to go in the way. Eventually, after like a couple of weeks, I really said to myself, right, you've got to sit down and start working on one of these projects, because the Gumroad was doing really badly as well. And right as my brain was just about to kind of get settled into at least doing one task on Biogen, it did this weird, like, I don't know if this is like an attention deficit thing, where it kind of cringes and then tries to find the next interesting thing to do instead, which is always a really strong feeling. But this time, finally, it clung onto something artistic. I was like, okay, well, let's do something with character lighting. And this is where we ended up with the Modular Workspaces character display update. I was like, okay, well, at least maybe it's not Biogen, but at least it's something for one of the products. So I just got completely focused on that, and I was like, okay, this is better than the alternative of doing something completely unrelated. Let's just work on this then. But the reason why that was effective for Modular Workspaces, because let's face it, if I actually just sat down and told myself you're going to work on Modular Workspaces today, it would never have happened. But the reason it was effective was because it's a distraction that was fun, and it didn't feel like I was actually working on the project, which is something we have been talking about in recent videos on this channel. How can you convince yourself that you're not going to be working on the project while still working on it? If you anticipate you have to do something, at least in my case this is, then you won't want to do it. So it seems like a trick that's maybe effective for me is that by making artwork, you can trick yourself into being productive. So the trick for finally working in Biogen may end up being, think of a series of art pieces you want to make with the tool. and make those. And as you're making it, siphon off that content into, well, content for the next update. But then as usual, something else gets thrown into the mix. Blender 3.4 was released, and all of a sudden Biogen stopped working on Mac devices specifically. I don't know why. Biogen 9.1.1 was working fine on Mac on Blender 3.3, works fine on Windows, and as far as I know, works fine on Linux. Blender 3.4 comes out, 9.1.1 works on Windows, works on Linux as far as I know, does not work on Mac. Those are the two elements, Mac and Blender 3.4, and for some reason the add-on doesn't work. And I've been talking to a couple of users. They've been showing me screenshots of like their file structures. One of them used like a kind of automatic settings migration tool, which I think, I've never used this with Blender because I don't use like the installers or any of the extra stuff. I just download Blender from like the zip files, and then I just have a series of them on my device. So I don't know what like the settings migration is like if you're doing it automatically. But they showed me that for some reason they had multiple versions of the add-on in their settings. I have no idea how that happened, but somehow the migrator had created duplicates, and they were different versions of the add-on as well, which didn't really make any sense. Maybe they had migrated the settings twice, but from like different versions. But anyway, that's not the main problem. It seems that Biogen has trouble reading from the official content pack blend file. I cannot diagnose it, I cannot debug it because I don't have a Mac device. It may be something to do with redundant code and how the object is selected once it's imported, and maybe there's a difference in the behavior between the operating systems with Blender 3.4, but I can't test it. But anyway, the problem is now that whenever I think about working on the project, I am confronted by this roadblock in my mind going, well, I want to work on it, I want to make art stuff for it now, but now I can't because whatever I make, I have to add an exception in the video or on the store page saying, this won't work with Mac, and that's going to piss people off. So now I'm confronted with this problem which I can't fix because I can't test it without relying on other people. And I know it's going to prevent me from working on the project because I don't want to put something out that's going to annoy people and go, oh, I wish this worked on Mac, or why doesn't this work on Mac, etc., etc. So just like the visualization of that problem prevents me from working on it. So now there's like this roadblock. Like why? Why is it a problem? It worked fine on Blender 3.3, but not on 3.4. What happened in 3.4? And why is it only Mac specific? There is probably something I can do in the code to get around it, but it may even be something simple, just like changing a couple of lines with how objects are referenced. Because if it's not a problem with importing the content from the content pack, it will be a problem with selecting it afterwards. And I may have a redundant line of code. It may just be like a one-line problem, but I won't know because I can't test it. I'll just have to choose a different way of doing it and hope that fixes it for Mac, and then just wait for people to let me know. So that's what I'm thinking at the moment. My current plan is find a different way to import things, try and add some more complex exception handling. So like if things go wrong, then maybe put this kind of message on the screen or try a different method, and then just continue working on it for Windows, assuming everything's okay, and then just hope, fingers crossed, that it works for Mac. Maybe just putting in a notice on the final update video saying, hey, this might not work for you, very sorry, but it just stopped working in 3.4. And it's annoying because pretty much all of the problems, all of the errors that have been reported to me from Biogen since update 9.1.1 have been Mac issues. And I completely understand why software developers drop support for entire operating systems just because they don't want to behave. So we'll see. I might take a break from the recording just for now to let the camera cool down. So I'll be back. All right, part 2. Let's talk about the AI subject. So talking more about AI artwork and stuff has actually been something I've been avoiding a bit on the main channel. I did one video about Midjourney and Blender that was more with a focus of like integrating AI as a useful tool for assisting in material creation. I also did a couple of more extensive discussion videos about it on this channel, kind of talking more about how when it comes to thinking about tools of any kind in the production of artwork, I always think about the story of creation, not like in a biblical sense, but in a sense of everything important to me about a piece of artwork is related to the story of how it was made. That can, just as well be in regards to technique and the tools used as it is the reason why the artwork came to be in the first place. Historical value is also something very important that contributes to the story of creation. For example, like the Mona Lisa, Leonardo da Vinci. Not just is who made it, how it was made, why it was made, interesting, but also everything that came afterwards, how and where it existed leading up to the modern day is part of its story. And just the longevity between when something was created and the modern day adds to the value of a piece. But that's not really what we're talking about. With AI artwork, I see the tool as just that. It's a tool, functionally. And in previous videos, I said that what I find much more interesting than prompt artwork and more compelling from an artistic standpoint is when AI tools are used as parts of a larger process. For ideation, for cleanup, for breed topology or whatever. Just something as interesting tools to assist in a larger creation story from an artist. The more complex the creation story, the more interesting it is to me. Of course, there is value in just the output, which is something that I think people, are really obsessed about with the AI artworks. But again, I've just always felt like the unseen element of the creation process is always the most interesting thing, but obviously that's not how everyone thinks about it. But the main thing spiking up with AI artwork now is the copyright issue, with the fact that datasets used for the prompt generating tools comes from copyrighted material, so the actual image content created by artists available on different websites. In particular, ArtStation's been at the focus of this discussion recently because, though I don't know all the details, artists kind of came together to protest AI artwork being on the platform. Everyone had all these, stop signs with the AI text as their thumbnails for the art pieces on the platform. ArtStation has not been super responsive to the protests, from what I've seen. They've said stuff about updating the terms and also adding like a no AI tag so you can prevent your artwork being used in the datasets, which I think if you have the capacity to stop it from being used in datasets, that should be the default, and then people should be able to opt into it. But yeah, from like the social perspective, you can see why artists on a website like ArtStation wouldn't be very happy with art generating tools, especially if it's coming from a dataset that was created using those artists' artwork. Yeah, it feels very cheap, like they're being exploited. The thing is though, we come to an interesting conversation about intelligence tools and inspiration in general, because artificial intelligence is by nature designed to try and mimic intelligence and the human brain, how we onboard information and create information. In a different context, I'm not sure if people would be as angry about the technique. For example, a lot of AI technology research around the world focuses around these very, very lackluster humanoid, pretty pathetic and pointless robotics projects. So that might be a bit of like a controversial statement. I'm not talking about like Boston Dynamics. I mean more like, Asimov from Honda. Definitely not the only one. There are loads of companies that do this. They make, they start working on all these robotic humans, but they always look crap. The articulation is awful, and they have all these really fake chatbot-y features, and it's just really cringe. But that's a very different context, right? To like the kind of technology we use here, these types of computers, what we're making with them, etc. That's a much more human-centric design. If this AI art prompt generation diffusion technology was put or used in connection with a project like that, something where someone's actually trying to build a human, where that robot could, I don't know, draw out a piece of artwork, but the artwork it's drawing is inspired by a dataset it's known, which includes other people's artwork, even, more classical artists like Caravaggio, and it's creating artwork from this knowledge base. I don't think people would be concerned about that, at least not in the same way that we're seeing with ArtStation, because we understand that someone's trying to create a fake human being, and they're simulating the process of inspiration and essentially just demonstrating how the skill level would be much higher, because from a computational system you could get much more accurate results. AI art generating prompt tools are effectively doing the same thing. Well, it's the same technique. You're basically onboarding a lot of data like you as a human would when you're browsing the internet looking at artworks. You're learning as you're looking at it. Subconsciously you're onboarding interesting visuals and how things connect. You're more likely not looking at things in a very raw way, but in a more abstract way, noticing the colors work well together or certain shapes or composition. There are a lot of kind of skills and techniques you can pick up by doing that you don't necessarily need to learn with raw conscious effort. But the thing is, when you create artwork after being inspired by, like 10,000 pieces of artwork, no one's coming to you with a copyright complaint unless there's a very obvious connection. For example, if you're taking someone else's character and making a bunch of artwork about it without having the rights to it or something like that. But the point is, at the fundamental level, the process is the same. The AI art prompt tool is doing the same thing. It's taking from a data set, using it as ingredients to create an output. The difference here is it's not a person. So the question there is, should it be allowed to use other artists' work as source data for its creation process? And if not, then why not? Because believe it or not, we have had this kind of discussion in society before of how much copyright stuff can you use before it becomes unfair. And that's where the whole fair use policy comes from, especially for like, YouTube and stuff. When you're thinking about whether to like show someone's artwork in the background of a video, or like the logo for a branded company like Coca-Cola or something. Things which are not like the central focus of the content and are used in a remixed way that is considered fair, we're okay with. But we still kind of haven't really come to a universal consensus about that, because it also depends on the type of the artistic content, because we have very different attitudes for music compared to like visuals. The music industry has been very, very harsh on, the internet and the digital industry and piracy and all of that. Spotify seems to have done a lot to settle all the woes, should we say. But with visuals, it's very hard to copyright visuals. It's very hard to copyright styles. Several artists can share the same style. We can't necessarily say that a specific style belongs to a specific artist unless there's enough of it there to make sense. For example, Simon Stalenhag's artwork is very often copied, mimicked. There are lots of different elements about it which are mimicked. For example, a certain canvas brush style, certain color tones, composition of large background objects hidden in the distant fog, and people walking around in kind of melancholy or novelty, boring environments, something that people are very familiar with. Things like basic urban houses and telephone wires and stuff like that. Enough of the recognizably Simon Stålenhag elements make a Simon Stålenhag piece. But Simon Stålenhag is not the only person who uses that kind of canvas brush style, or mundane environments, or large background elements. So the thing is, identifying style to person has always been a bit of like a blurry game. That's the question with these AI art generation tools. Okay, so how much of using other people's work is fair? How much should you allow? Because, at the moment, to avoid copyright issues, certain prompt generating tools are completely removing artists from the dataset, which is fine, which is fair. And, artists are happy about that because their work's not being exploited in that way. But is that necessarily the right thing to do? Because again, according to fair use, should these tools be allowed to use that artwork in some limited way for inspiring the dataset, even if it's not just modern artwork, but old public domain artwork? Are we going to make a difference about that? Like, I suppose there's also the argument commercial usage, where if you're an artist and you don't want your art added to a data set because you say, okay, well, I don't want them to use it commercially. If they're making money off this prompt generation thing, I think that's a fair argument, because then you feel like, well, maybe I should get a cut from that because my artwork's in the data set. But then again, there's possibly no way to trace back and say that the result actually came from the part of the data set that you contributed to indirectly. It depends how obfuscated that process is. There is also the element that AI art generation tools are going to be impossible to suppress. So you need to make a comparison with the NFT phase here. They're not directly the same. The reason they can be compared is that they're emerging technologies with a lot of hype surrounding them, and the same kind of people tend to gravitate towards them. NFTs for me were always an unnecessary solution to a non-existent problem. You can create a problem about anything, and you can create a solution for a fake problem very easily. You can convince people that there's a problem and convince people there's a solution. It's called cults. It's very easy to invent a problem where there is none. And to me, it always seemed like NFTs were a way to kind of force this blockchain tech into popular culture by pretending there was a problem with art trading in the digital space. I don't think you can force scarcity in a digital space. At the end of the day, everything comes back to the physical world, which is why we talked about the auction idea earlier. But the thing is, these AI tools, and the techniques specifically, do solve real problems. And I'm not just talking about artwork. Across multiple industries, AI tools are going to be fundamentally essential for the development of new medical technologies, and even for the experimentation of exotic new physical theories. For example, if you take the medical field, imagine that you have an AI model that's trained to understand the human body on a deep level and identify patterns that we're not even capable of understanding, or even just identifying. And then separately from that, having a exquisite understanding of how chemicals affect biological systems, understanding how those chemicals can be applied to different parts of the body and how they can be packaged into new forms of drugs. Putting that all together, AI systems, especially generative ones, which can come up with like simulation data sets, for example, to further test these ideas, can put all of those pieces together and come up with just an incredible variety of testable theories of how the combinations of all these elements together can solve certain problems. In this case, it may be like cancer issues, Alzheimer's, etc. The techniques for generating simulatable data sets and generating AI prompt artwork are not that far-fetched from each other. If you remove like the final format, the medium, raw techniques used to take data in, modify it, and then generate an output are largely similar and transferable between different industries. What does this have to do with AI artwork? Well, if we collectively suppress AI art generation tools, it will only ever be a temporary suppression, because the same techniques are going to keep elevating in other industries. This is different from NFTs because they elevated in the digital art space but didn't elevate anywhere else. There's no pressure for them to maintain their existence. So it's one cult-like mentality trying to push it up, and it's just dying everywhere else. Except for some really hyper-specific industries trying really hard to push blockchain technology inside of like a closed network or something. With these AI data generation tools, in multiple industries across the world, they are amplifying massively. And even if you suppress AI art as an output from this, eventually, because of the number of emerging industries, new industries as well, new companies, people are going to keep asking the question, hey, why don't we use this technique for artwork? Why don't we use this technique for artwork? And it will just come straight back again. Artificial general intelligence techniques, AGI techniques, are going to keep growing, get more efficient, more varied, and be applied to a greater and greater number of use cases. What we're seeing now is probably just the beginning. We're already getting scared of some of the results which can be made. AI technologies are getting exceedingly good at generating artwork, now music as well, text responses to things, just general ideation. Suppressing it in one specific field, one specific area, is going to be a futile exercise, in my opinion. That's not to say that I agree with AI tools being used to, exploit people's artwork to generate results, because I definitely feel like on certain platforms like ArtStation, AI artwork should not be allowed, just as like a general prompt response. It's not really the culture, the social culture of ArtStation isn't really compatible with that, so I don't think it's an appropriate place for that. But I do think the suppression of AI art tools is futile. And even as the technology improves, if we said that, there was an art portfolio website like ArtStation that just didn't allow AI art at all, people are still going to be uploading pieces made using AI art tools. And if they're good enough, no one will know the difference, especially if you're creative enough with style transfer, because you can hide a lot of inconsistencies in a creative style. It's quite rare that I have strong opinions one way or the other about like emerging technologies. With the NFT thing, I tried to be like very central to start with, and then kind of just fell more and more on one side as it became more abundantly obvious what it was, in my opinion. This AI technology thing is very different to me because it just crosses into so many different lines of humanity and industries. And I think we may be on the cusp of some kind of data revolution or simulation revolution. I'm not talking about simulation, oh my god. I'm not talking about it in terms of like meta VR stuff. Ugh, that's cringy. I mean theory simulation, medical simulation, theoretical physics simulation, architectural simulation, engineering simulation, the optimal forms to make for shapes, for maximum stress protection, earthquake protection, simulating the geographic structure of the world to more accurately predict when volcanoes and other events, flooding, will occur, more accurately predicting climate change and weather patterns, designing and engineering technology to help us migrate further into space. Like the early signals here and the signs of like a new data revolution are quiet, but I think they're there. And even earlier today, I was just asking GPT to help me come up with new ideas for how to change my titles slightly for the main channel to kind of optimize them more and make them seem less repetitive. And it's a really useful tool for doing that. I feel like there's a lot of hidden value in just like helping a single human take something they already know and just move them out of their headspace a bit, adding a bit more artificial creativity into the equation. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like something is coming and I'm not entirely sure what it is, but it'll be interesting. But I would of course be interested in hearing other people's opinions as well. Like I said, I'm not exactly one view or the other on this, and it's always disappointing to me like when I read extreme opinions one way or the other on these kinds of emerging technologies, because we don't understand the potential for what it's going to look like in 5, 10, 20 years. Like no one can predict exactly what's going to happen. People barely, or maybe even didn't predict that AI would be generating such interesting art results. So that's my general view for like the whole artwork thing. On ArtStation, I don't think AI art as is should be allowed, but I do think AI tools assisting in a larger creation process should be fine. I think the artists should probably not have their artwork put in datasets by default. It should be an opt-in thing, especially if it's being used for like commercial usage, which a lot of these AI art generation tools are. So I don't think that's fair on the artist because, let's face it, a lot of artists are underpaid or just not paid at all, so it's definitely not fair from a social perspective. But at the same time, separate from all of this, I think that suppressing AI tools is a futile exercise because they're just going to keep coming straight back again. Because given that there's extra pressure around the world in different industries using similar techniques, not even in the same medium, not even in the same format, but similar techniques nonetheless, I think there will always be pressure to bring the tools right back again. So yeah, that's just my thoughts about the subject. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. It'll be interesting to hear like more opinions about it, but again, I'll be more interested in hearing balanced perspectives. So if you made it this far through the video, put a robot emoji in the comments, but maybe write something with it as well, because I don't know if YouTube will start considering just emojis as spam, because I think they're making some changes to how they're dealing with spam bots. Yeah, anyway, thanks for listening everyone, and I will see you next time.